The word noble does not appear by accident. When Italian builders of the 15th century named a floor, they named it for the social order it was meant to embody. The piano nobile, the noble floor, was not simply the story above the ground. It was the story above the ground that mattered, the one where ceremony happened, where guests were received, where the family presented itself to the world. Everything below it served, everything above it slept. The floor in between was the point of the whole building, and 4 centuries of European architecture agreed on that point with a consistency that is, when you look at it now, almost startling. What is less startling, when you understand the history, is that the idea never actually went away. Le Corbusier thought he was abolishing it. He was not. He was mechanizing it. The Palazzo Medici Riccardi in Florence, begun in 1444 by Michelozzo di Bartolomeo, makes the argument in section before you ever open a plan. The ground floor is heavy, rough, rusticated, blocks of stone cut so deliberately crude that they read as the architectural equivalent of a clenched fist. This is the base of the building, and it communicates exactly what a base should. Solidity, mass, the accumulated weight of the institution sitting above. Horses came through here, goods arrived, servants moved through these lower spaces in the ordinary course of keeping a household running. The ground floor was infrastructure, the floor above it was everything else. Climb the stair from that rusticated base and the stone changes character. The masonry smooths, the windows lengthen and acquire classical frames. The ceiling height opens. You are now in the reception rooms, built for the Medici to conduct their affairs, receive ambassadors, display the family's reach. The section of the building has already told you what kind of person uses each floor before you have encountered a single person. That is the piano nobile at its most explicit. Social hierarchy performed in vertical feet. Palladio understood this and made it strange in the best possible way. The Villa Rotonda, designed in 1566 outside Vicenza, sits on a stepped podium and presents 4 identical ceremonial stairways, one on each facade. Every face of the building is equally the front. There is no service entrance because there is no back. Palladio has taken the climbing sequence that Michelozzo used to sort ceremony from service and turned it into a philosophical statement. The elevation of the piano nobile is universal, not directional. You arrive from any point on the compass and climb the same number of steps to reach the same condition of elevation. The idea of the noble floor has been abstracted from its social machinery and converted into pure geometry. That abstraction did not survive contact with the city. In Paris, the piano nobile came back down to earth and got written into law. Between 1853 and 1870, Baron Haussmann remade Paris at a scale no European city had seen in centuries. Wide boulevards, uniform building heights, standardized facades. Embedded in that standardization was a precise definition of the premium floor. Second-floor apartments in the Haussmann typology were required to meet specific ceiling heights, running between 3.5 and 4 meters, and their facades carried the ornamental ironwork balconies that still define the Paris streetscape today. The piano nobile had been an aristocratic custom. Haussmann converted it into a regulated real estate category. The noble floor was now a legal instrument, a line item in a building code, a thing you could price and sell and underwrite. It is worth pausing on what Haussmann actually did to the idea. He did not invent it. The logic of the elevated principal floor had been running continuously in European domestic architecture for 400 years by the time his engineers started demolishing the medieval street pattern. What he did was fix its dimensions, anchor it to a specific story number, and encode it in the physical vocabulary of the balcony. If you stand on a Paris boulevard and count the iron railings, you can read the Haussmann hierarchy at a glance. The second floor projects slightly. Its balcony runs the full width of the facade, and the ceiling height behind it gives the windows a proportion that nothing above can quite match. The building is arguing in its section that this is where you want to be. Le Corbusier stood in front of that argument in 1931 and appeared to disagree with it entirely. The Villa Savoy, completed that year in Poissy, lifts off the ground on 6 slender concrete pilotis, leaving the site empty beneath the building, a kind of architectural levitation. There is no rusticated base. There is no gradual climb from service to ceremony. The ground is simply surrendered, passed through, left to the car and the grass. This was the language of the 5 points, the declaration that the new architecture had broken with everything the Palazzo Medici Riccardi represented, except that the living floor of the Villa Savoy sits exactly 3.5 meters above the ground. The Pilates do not abolish the piano nobile. They remove the base that justified it and leave the elevated floor floating without visible support, which is a different thing entirely. Le Corbusier stripped away the rustication, the climbing sequence, the architectural narrative of ascent, and kept the ascent. The thing that looked like a revolution was a preservation. The noble floor survived the revolution it was supposed to symbolize. It just lost its staircase and pretended not to notice. The architects who came after Le Corbusier and took his logic seriously arrived at some genuinely disruptive places. James Stirling and James Gowan, designing the Leicester Engineering Building in 1963, looked at the single elevated principal floor and decided it was the problem rather than the solution. Their section deliberately splinters what the piano nobile had unified. Lecture theatres, laboratories, and offices stack at staggered levels, overlapping, refusing to resolve into a single horizontal plane of importance. There is no floor in that building that reads as the noble one. The vertical social hierarchy that the piano nobile had performed for 4 centuries becomes architecturally illegible at Leicester. You cannot tell, from the section, which level matters most, because the section refuses to make that argument. Allison and Peter Smithson pushed the idea in a different direction at Robin Hood Gardens in Bermondsey, completed in 1972. Their strategy was to take the piano nobile horizontally, rather than vertically, to string the idea of the elevated communal level across the face of a social housing block in the form of wide external access decks they called streets in the sky. Every resident would have access to elevated common ground, a shared piano nobile democratized across the whole section. The building was demolished in phases between 2017 and 2021. The idea outlasted the structure, as ideas usually do, but it outlasted it without vindication. The streets in the sky never became the social landscape the Smithsons imagined. The elevation was there. The life that was supposed to fill it was not. Which brings you back to what the section is still arguing, nearly 600 years after Michelozzo cut that rusticated stone. The piano nobile was never only about height. It was about the relationship between height and arrival, the understanding that a room you climb to is a different kind of room from one you walk into at grade. That difference is physical, but it is also psychological. The building that makes you climb before it admits you has already changed your state of mind by the time you get there. Le Corbusier understood this and kept the elevation while eliminating the visible effort. The Smithsons understood it and tried to share the elevation with everyone. Stirling understood it and refused the elevation altogether. None of them escaped it. The